Good morning. My name is Erica Antone. I am the WTS Philadelphia president, and I'm honored to welcome you today to our City of Philadelphia Transit Plan, a Vision for 2040. This event is a co-collaboration between our WTS Philadelphia chapter, COMTO, and SMPS. Before we start, I just wanted to take the time to thank our committee who planned this, consisting of Kelly Freeman, Lydia Gross, Toyin, I'm sorry, Toyin, I'm not going to get it, and Eileen Delaval. Everyone, upon joining, your microphones have been muted. Please hold your questions to the end. There will be a time that you can ask our panelists. And just a thank you to all of our organization sponsors. Your generosity and support is what allows us to host these programs and co-collaborate and hear from our distinguished panelists and moderators. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Lydia, who will introduce our presenters for today.
Thank you, Erica. I truly have the pleasure in introducing this wonderful panel. Starting with the Honorable Sánchez, Councilwoman from the 7th District, where she has over 30 years of serving the City of Philadelphia. She chairs City Council committees on appropriation, education, and is a co-chair of both of those. We also have Jody Holton, and Jody is the Assistant General Manager for the Planning and Strategic Initiatives with Septa, and she has over 20 years of experience of community and transportation planning in the Philadelphia region. Then we have Sarah Clark. Sarah Stuart is the Executive Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Philadelphia, where she develops strategic campaigns to advance high-quality, connected regional trail and bike networks, Division Zero policies, and active transportation infrastructure to make streets and neighborhoods safer. And we cannot round out this panel without having a fantastic moderator, Mike Carroll. Mike is the Deputy Manager Director for the Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability, oTIS, in the City of Philadelphia, where he leads a diverse team in developing strategies and implementing policies to build a safe and equitable multimodal system across Philadelphia. Mike, so I'm going to turn it over to you. I am looking forward to the great discussion and dialogue about the Transportation 2045.
Thank you, Lydia. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. I'm really excited to be here to talk to a fantastic panel about the transit plan. oTIS and the City of Philadelphia was really grateful that we were able to collaborate with Septa and so many partners in order to develop the transit plan. It really represents our sort of love letter to public transit in the Philadelphia region. And so having the opportunity to ask some pointed questions for people who are going to be involved in actually making it a reality is certainly a thrill for me. So I'm excited to jump in. The first question I want to direct to any panelist who chooses to answer. And the transit plan is coming in at a great time with the passage of the infrastructure bill by the US Congress. So many Philadelphia are looking forward to the plan's initiatives and really want to see it funded and really want to see these things take place. Can someone on the panel talk about why transit is so important in the Philadelphia region?
Well, I can jump in and start out there, Mike. Yeah, I think that's, in the transit plan, as Mike you said, it is a love letter to transit service in the city, and at Septa, of course, we feel the same way. Our transit service is part of how we're going to build out of this recovery, out of the pandemic. We believe in resilient future, more prosperous and equitable future. So providing transit allows for everyone to have mobility options in the city, regardless of your ability or what stage of life you're in. It's also an affordable way to get around in the city, and is part of our competitive edge, I think, for attracting employers and jobs, bringing jobs to the community. likewise, the further investment in transit that the bill or the IIJA funding brings to the region is an investment in that type of future, more equitable, resilient future. And when we look at the improvements that the administration, the federal administration, is looking to invest in, we're in alignment. You know, we want to focus on improvements, capital projects that improve accessibility on our system, that improve our contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the community, and a number of other ways that we can speed the trip of transit riders so that they have the same type of travel time that single occupancy vehicles can have, and to speed up that trip so that we are investing in making transit even more competitive in this region. So it's great to have this infusion of funding from the federal government that has, you know, very similar mission to what the cities laid out in their transit plan, and what we've seen in Septa released a strategic business plan last year, and it's a 5-year plan, and it has very similar goals to be proactive, to deliver a seamless transit network that is intuitive to use so that we can bring riders back in this recovery.
Thank you, Jody. So we're all focused, I think, on equity and resiliency and access, all the things that we value transit for. Can anyone talk about how the implementation of the plan, the improvements in transit might affect you and your work and your organization's work, and what we're looking at in the region?
I'll jump in. So there's so much great alignment between the transit plan and the city, your oTIS's and the city's transportation strategic plan, Connect, which was put out a few years earlier. And you know, in that plan, there's a goal to build 40 miles of a high quality bicycle network of protected lanes. And in both plans, there's great alignment between building out and improving the transit system, but also the bicycle network system so that they work together better. And I think that with the opportunity provided by the new bill, there's going to be this once in a maybe generation opportunity for Philadelphia and the region to build out two networks that together will really be important and make it possible for people to take transit or use a bicycle or walk for trips, and you know, reduce dependencies on cars. And so I think that that for us is a wonderful, you know, great opportunity to really be able to help the, you know, for the help push the city towards reaching those goals in the next 5 to 10 years that I think only this bill really gives us that chance.
Let me add, and thank you so very much for inviting me, and for all the practitioners, you know, on the elected side, you know, my perspective from what I hear from residents, and I represent, you know, just north of the city, North Philadelphia, and then harder to access neighborhoods in the Northeast, along with 10 L stops. You know, what we learned, and we knew this prior to COVID, but what we saw during COVID is that public transit and the infrastructure was a lifeline. There were many people who were not privileged to be able to pivot at home and were essential workers. I'm glad we labeled them essential workers, and we figured out that these sometimes low-wage workers, without them, we can't keep a city running. And so it really highlighted for folks the need for that kind of infrastructure work. I think many times as we're building out neighborhoods and neighborhoods are evolving, we don't focus on that, and having a plan and a vision that's a little bit more bolder. And I know you used the term aspirational in the plan. I like to say, let's be bolder around how do we connect neighborhoods and how do we connect people to jobs, but also in a way that we think differently. And I represent one of the districts with the largest number of, for instance, used cars per household, like all of the bad habits that we're trying to move away from. But it's really hard to get people to think about envisioning a city that is really multimodal, that is really walkable, right, and safe, and that and folks feel part of that. And it requires a lot of planning and a lot of deliberation that many times when you're making life decisions on a day-to-day basis and you're in poor communities, you don't have the ability to really think through, how does this impact me? How will my life be easier? I know with Septa, you know, we've learned through COVID and post-COVID that we need the transit system to not only recover, but thrive, because the residents in these neighborhoods absolutely need a good infrastructure system.
Thank you, Councilmember Sánchez. And if you don't mind me sticking with you as you think about how transit affects folks in your district, you know, you're dealing with them every day. They know who to reach out to if they're having issues with SEPTA or their mobility or their own opportunities. And so when you're thinking about how we can fund and program this work, you're also very deeply engaged in that and wrestling with the challenges around funding. So, you know, what do you do? What tools do you use in order to make sure that the funding is equitable, that the opportunities are spread around for folks in your district in particular?
And this is a space where there's been a lot of work, and one of the reasons there's always pushback from some of the residents around this infrastructure work is because we don't have access. We don't have access to the work on the front end, from the lack of diversity on the planning side to the lack of diversity who actually does the work. And then as it relates to community engagement, this push and pull around who actually gets engaged, right? And again, there's sometimes we forget that people have busy lives and they can't sit around tables planning for themselves, but it doesn't mean that they don't want their voices added to that, right? So there's a juggle around equity and inclusion in these processes. And then how do we make these processes friendlier to conversations that sometimes are tenseful about people feeling that new infrastructure is for new people, not for the people that are there making their lives more productive, right? And there's the constant push and pull in that. And I think those are healthy. Our neighborhoods need connectivity, and I think infrastructure leads to that. I think some of the work oTIS has started around really holding interdepartmentals accountable to what infrastructure looks like and how it improves people's quality of life is a great start. I think this infusion of money, as Sarah highlighted, we need to really be more interdisciplinary and figure out how some of this really does improve people's lives, whether it's obviously the environmental work that we're doing around water, stormwater management, what that can add to green and, you know, and some of the infrastructure pieces. But the walkability and around neighborhoods, I think it's huge, and there's not enough time for folks to really think this through. And that's why, you know, I'm encouraged by these longer term plans, right? And then obviously challenge all of us in our engagement process to hear all the voices and to make people feel like these are vital to their quality of life, regardless of whatever their income status or current accessibility is. And we have a lot of work to do in this space. And, you know, one of the things as we talk about equitable recovery is we have to do it. So Septa has been very open around contracting. You know, they've done a lot of work in this space. We got to do better. We got to do more, right? I think our own city departments, we've seen the challenges. And I think part of this is, you know, how do we bundle some of this work so people are included in every part of the process.
And Councilmember, you and your colleagues on the Budget Committee and the rest of the City Council are faced with so many critical issues in this day. And so I'm wondering how you really work to set priorities, you know, not just within transportation projects, but between transportation projects and other important things that you're working on.
Yeah, it's really hard. And some of the debate is always very limited what people see versus the planning part. You know, I work with the Planning Commission very closely. They're the professionals, right? And I have my own personal emotional feelings around neighborhoods, but then, you know, I consult the planning professionals about what does this mean for today, 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. In council, you know, and COVID has been part of this problem, but we haven't really had the broad-based planning conversation about what does the city look like in 2030, let alone 2045 that the plan, you know, is highlighting. You know, there's always a tug and pull. I think people and we need to do, again, when government aligns itself and shows the interdisciplinary work within departments, I think it's easier for those of us in council to partake in a process where we can encourage our constituents to embrace some of this work, right? I use American Street, you know, some of the work that was done there around multimodal and opening it up to more of a pedestrian walkability. You know, I live on that American Street corridor. The corridor and all of the federal investment was around this industrial hub. It's not an industrial hub. Now it's a light industrial hub with an art community coming in and some other stuff. And part of the debate and the push and pull is around jobs and economy, and infrastructure really helps shape that job creation that we want in the city. And so people are right to want to kind of push back and say, what are the jobs we've been promised through these investments? And that's why this kind of planning is so important. We want employers to come into neighborhoods, right, and feel safe and feel like their employees can come in as well as creating local jobs. And that doesn't happen by accident. It really has to be intentional and focused, and that groundwork has to be there. And we have to do, you know, elected officials and others, we have to do a better job at responding to the legitimate concerns of residents. At the same time, also helping them envision something different that they've never seen. When we travel, those of us who have the privilege to travel, we go to cities and we don't think about just renting a car, right? It's always around public transit. We get hotels based on public transit. We plan our trips accordingly. And in Philadelphia, people have to understand that their life should be like that, their accessibility. And Septa's done a lot of good work around, you know, some of the fair structures around families. And I think that's positive, getting families to the zoo and to our own attractions. But there's a lot more work to be done in the space, and the equity space. You know, fortunately now we can have more tenseful conversations in an unapologetic way and really hear people's frustration, because many of these communities lack the investment for a long time. And these new investments are scary to them. And again, they don't feel it's for them. And that's our job to do, those of us who have the honor to serve them.
Thank you. One more thought I want to get from you. You know, when we talk about infrastructure, often people envision capital projects and capital investment and capital funding. What are ways that we can use this opportunity to invest in people?
Infrastructure is all about people, right? And we, again, when we articulate, those of us who advocate in this space, sometimes we forget that this is capital bricks and mortar, but it is around quality of life for people. And that connectivity is part of what we're missing. And, you know, these spaces have to be programmed, right? It's sort of like we want to have a green space 10 minutes away from every in every neighborhood. That requires programming as part of this, right? Is envisioning, you know, your office hosts the annual, you know, Open Streets initiative. We learned through the streeteries. We've learned that people do want to connect, right? But this work requires programming. It requires, again, a really intense community engagement process. And how we handle that is going to help us sell this bigger vision that, you know, that people sometimes can't imagine. So the programming side of all of these spaces is huge. So in our Parks and Rec, in some of the corridor planning, all of this stuff requires a kind of programming. So bricks and mortars is really about people. And so what you do with the brick and mortar is how you program the space.
Thank you.
And by the way, it creates safety. You know, the other part, good, you know, pedestrian and bicycle, it creates safety. And so we spend a lot of money on public safety, and we don't think about the front end of how to create safe spaces.
Thank you for that. Jody, I want to turn back to you and maybe get your thoughts. And when we think about the transit plan, you know, there's 5 goals that we're focused on. So there's transit safety, reliability, and cleanliness. We also want to think about transit's role for the environment. We've talked a lot about how transit is a tool to promote equity and justice for Philadelphians and, you know, folks throughout the whole region. We also want to think about what the challenges are today with transit and how we can kind of get through a pretty challenging time. But also, lastly, we want to make sure that we've got robust ideas about the future of transit. So if we think about all 5 of these goals, and Septa's work in terms of managing the operations, but also funding these capital improvements, and especially in the middle still, hopefully towards the end, but of a pandemic, where do you think that Septa lands specifically in terms of pushing forward for the priorities of implementation?
Yeah, well, first, I think I should speak about the safety piece. Through the pandemic, I think some things have been amplified, and it's so important that we focus on a clean, safe environment for our riders, and that really is a partnership between the city and Septa. And so glad to have Councilmember Sánchez out during the height of the pandemic along the Market Frankfurt line, where we experienced a lot of cleanliness issues, and we worked to find a community solution. There was an infrastructure solution as well, needing to repair elevators and so forth, but we've invested so much in providing social services guides along the system, to having security guards. We've really tried so many ways to make the system as safe and clean as possible. We're investing more now in maintenance custodians and cleaning than we ever have. And I think that it shows on the system. There's still work to be done, but again, it's a community effort, and it really involves partnerships to make that happen, to keep the system as safe and clean as possible. So we've made great strides there, and again, it's related to receiving funding from the federal government to help us not only fill the gap that our fare revenue loss during the pandemic created, but also to invest in those types of things. So we are tremendously grateful for that funding through the CARES Act. But on the bill side, on the capital side, moving forward, we really have the opportunity now to make significant investments to make our Broad Street line, our Market Frankfurt line, more accessible. We'll be able to put into design all of the remaining stations that need to be accessible on those two lines by 2026. They'll be in design, and the goal is by 2030 to have them all accessible. So just the first capital budget amendment that were worked on and just accepted puts that towards reality. So something that we weren't able to do beforehand. We've also been able to match other competitive grant programs that are offered to make 37th and 19th streets accessible through the RAISE grant program. And that's really an investment in a long-term vision to make our trolley network accessible. We have the largest streetcar network in the country, and that trolley network is so important to Southwest Philly, Delaware County, and getting into Center City and University City. And we need the new vehicles to make it accessible, but we also need to make improvements to those tunnel stations. So that funding will go towards helping to make the tunnel stations more accessible. And then we've also been able to advance things that are important to making our bus network redesign, the bus revolution, to happen. So we received some competitive funds that we're able to match, again, that RAISE program to improve South Philadelphia's transportation centers. So we have spaces where our customers can have amenities, stops, and we're able to lay over and create more efficient scheduling, so we can have even more efficient and direct service, which is one of the goals of the bus revolution and the comprehensive bus network redesign. So the funding is critical, and we also are able to push along very visible state of good repair projects. So all the bridges between Suburban Station and 30th Street Station need to be rehabilitated. And we've been whittling away at that project, but we're able now to invest in it and get the third phase, the final phase, to actually rehabilitate those 7 bridges with this funding. So there's things that help us make the system safer, more reliable, all the goals that I think we share. And finally, I should probably mention the Fair Restructuring that we did during the pandemic, which made the transfers free, which helps us make a more efficient and connected transit system. We did make 12 and under fare free when traveling with an adult. And we know that those changes have the most benefits to the people that need it the most. So lower income households, we did an equity analysis to understand who is impacted by these changes. And in this case, the impacts are positive in a good way. We have made strides to help households that are lower income, single-headed households, female-headed households, which is, I think, again, our mutual goals.
Thank you. Sarah, you know that the transit plan has a focus on Vision Zero, and I'm sure you're also gratified to see that in the infrastructure funding, the federal government has really embraced Vision Zero in a way it really never has before. Can you talk a little bit about how you and the Bike Coalition see transit fitting into Vision Zero and more broadly into Complete Streets?
Sure, thanks. So not only am I wearing the hat of the Bicycle Coalition, I also am part of another coalition called Transit Forward Philadelphia that's very focused on both the transit plan and other aspects of Septa's operations and capital programs. But these, wearing both hats, Vision Zero is fundamental to everything around transportation. Driving down traffic deaths is important for so many different reasons. And by enabling Septa's system and the city's streets to be safer, more accessible, better designed, better engineered, all of that is combined is going to help drive down those traffic deaths. So it's incredibly important that we take these opportunities to make, I think, the bicycle network and the transit network more seamlessly connected. So when you have bike lanes well designed with bus stops or trolley stops so that they reduce those conflicts and make it safer for pedestrians to get to the bus or to the trolley, all of that helps drive down those kinds of conflicts and interactions that are unsafe. By enabling the bicycle network and the transit system to work better together, you have more ability to really truly have a multimodal between having your bicycle and getting on a bus or getting down into the subway system and using that bike for multiple sort of parts of your trip on the last mile, for example. All of that also helps in increasing safety and reducing interactions that result in injury or death. And then very important, I think, is what's being looked at right now by Septa is locating, and in the bus revolution that this opportunity will come, making sure that all bus stops are located well right next to crosswalks, sidewalks, to reduce those kinds of conflicts where a rider gets off the bus and then might get hit by a car. So that kind of opportunity of redesigning the transit system so that it works better with both the bicycle network and the sidewalk network is going to help increase safety and help the city get to that goal of Vision Zero by 2030.
Thank you. So I'll open this up for folks and enjoy all of your comments on this. The plan's mission statement is very action-oriented, and it's specifically to create a more equitable, safe, accessible, comfortable, affordable, and sustainable transit system to connect a recovered, reimagined Philadelphia. Can each of you think a little bit about which of these actions, what parts of these actions you would want to prioritize and focus on and really work with us to figure out how to tackle first? I'll start with you, Sarah, if you don't mind.
Sure. I think accessibility and reliability, those are the two areas that I think would make great strides towards increasing both the multimodal aspect of the Philadelphia's transportation and increasing safety. So those are the two areas that I hope, I mean, it's hard to pick among them all, but I think the two areas that I think have the most that cross-cut most with the goals of Vision Zero and increasing the building out the high quality bicycle network.
Thank you. Councilmember Sánchez, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, having, as Jody mentioned, and again, Septa was incredible throughout the COVID challenges. And while I appreciate all the work they're doing around safety and dealing with our unsheltered population, which is not their responsibility, but they've taken it on because they, respect and want to support their customers. For me, safety and cleanliness are huge, right? Those are like basic core. I can't even think about all the other stuff, right? Accessibility obviously is important, but cleanliness and safety is huge because, as I mentioned, I represent a district of essential workers who Septa is their lifeline. The transit system is their lifeline, and they need that. And so those are the areas we continue to work on. And again, I think Septa has gone even out of the scope of their work. I know the city continues to support some of that activity. I think we have to do a lot more in that space to make sure that people look at, that ride to work, that ride to school in a safe way. I'll give one example around what happens when we don't think about these things. We have Conwell Magnet School, which is in Kensington, which is built out for 800 schools in a high programming, high achieving school, and our enrollment is down to 350 students because once the kids get accepted, the parents do not want to allow their kids to use public transit. And we've done everything from commuting the young people from their transit stop to the schools, and it has not been effective. And so for me, that becomes, that's a symbol of why we need to do this work and really need to do it well, because we want children going to high performing schools of their choice, and public transit is an important part of that.
Thank you. Jody, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just would probably tag along on that one and say that, safety and reliability are at the forefront, and cleanliness is a big part of how people feel when they're on the system. And like was mentioned, we, have done a lot to provide health and human services, outreach support to as many people as possible that find themselves on our system. In addition to that, I think, we've had the opportunity in the last few months to install with the city bus lanes on JFK and Market. And admittedly, they're four powerful blocks long, but they are in the most heavily, trafficked piece of our network. It's one of the more important connections into Center City. So many of our bus routes ride along them. I think that there's a real opportunity, and we've been working on so many projects with the city on, looking at 19th and 20th, looking at with PennDOT on Castor Avenue and improvements there that we can make that not only make a safer experience with curb bump outs for our passengers to safely board, but also to help calm traffic and make our passengers, our riders, our pedestrians at some point in their trip, just like we all are. And so that pedestrian environment is so important to us. So those, I think anything that we can do to make the trip for transit riders on our street network, prioritizing those corridors where we have a lot of service, to make improvements in our signal system, to modernize the signal system so that traffic signal system, so that not just for transit, but for all users of the street, where we have the most modern equipment that can prioritize transit movements, and then also provide safe spaces for pedestrians, or more safe spaces for pedestrians. So we're looking forward to really accelerating some of those projects as we move into the bus revolution, and we have a new network of bus routes that we know where they're going to be, and we know with the city where we should make those investments. So we're looking forward to that. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention our Reimagining regional rail project, to look if there are short-term improvements that we can make to the frequency of our service, understanding that we are coming out of the pandemic, our ridership has not recovered yet. we are looking at some of those improvements as well. So I think those are the places we're looking, and all of our planning efforts strive to be as inclusive and as transparent as possible. We have a lot of information on our website. That's something that the pandemic has really amplified, is the need for us to be as transparent and inclusive in these planning efforts as possible. It's not as easy now when the traditional public meeting is, sometimes it offers more access when we're virtual, but sometimes that does leave people behind. So we're working in a number of different ways to make sure that we're out on our system, asking our customers what do they prioritize, what would they invest in. So those are the things that we're focused on right now.
So Jody, I want to stick with you, and you talk about the short term, and as you know, there's a section that's devoted in the transit plan to today's challenges. So we're a year into the plan being a thing, and I'm wondering if you could talk about, for better or for worse, what's been the approach? How have you worked within Septa and worked with us, of course, and to figure out how to adapt to today's challenges and overcome them?
Well, maybe I'll talk first about the Fair Restructuring. So I mentioned what we did a year or so ago. We have been working with major employers, and we just in the last couple of weeks announced the Key Advantage program. It's a pilot program, 6 months, where 3 major employers, Penn Medicine, Drexel, and Wawa, will give all of their employees a transit pass, an anywhere transit pass, which is just what it sounds like, anywhere in the system, and they pay a flat rate per employee. And this is something that's been done across, mostly on the West Coast, and newer systems, newer cities that have newer systems. And it provides a steady source of revenue for those transit agencies. And that's something that we are really banking on, is that we can get transit to be part of the culture in Philadelphia. It already is in a lot of ways. We grew up around our transit network, but to have it be a competitive advantage for our employers to be able to provide that benefit to their employees and have it be any type of employee. So we're really looking forward to moving that to the next level in the fall and the coming years. I think that that's one of the important ways that we can recover ridership.
And it sounds like it's been a huge success getting out of the gate. So congratulations on that again. As I move to the next question, I think, Councilmember, I might want to get your perspective. We've talked a lot about equity. It's certainly a goal in the plan and a lot of the other work going on right now. How will you measure success when it comes to equity?
So clearly having, more inclusion from the beginning to the end, right? From the planning side. And, again, I'm encouraged by the number of female engineers and others involved in some of this process. I do think there are a lot of employment opportunities in this sector that we haven't explored. And, it's part of our skills gap with our workforce, some of the traffic surveying, some of those areas. So I think we have to, I'm a big proponent of community college and using community college to help us develop that skills gap and provide more people of color and more people from inner cities to participate in this workforce that's so critical and so necessary. So, setting up goals, I think there's a lot of, on the contracting side, a lot of more work that needs to be done in this space to ensure real inclusion in all parts of it, from engineering to architectural, and then obviously the actual work that gets done. So that is an important part of it. But, I think, again, as difficult as some of the recent, processes that your office has managed, you've learned that having a perspective and listening to these voices is hugely important, right? That we can't let infrastructure that is so critical to the city be a divisive point in our communities. It really is about connecting neighborhoods, right? And again, people, because we are a segregated city, we just don't think about it this way, that everything that we're doing is about creating that connectivity and giving people options, whether you're a biker or a walker or again, an essential worker that needs this work. So again, having these conversations, not being scared of them, not letting them become divisive, but become opportunities for conversation. I really appreciated when Septa tackled the Somerset challenge and, closed the station, and people came out and protested. And we could have just really said, oh, this is, let's back away. And really, their general manager, Leslie Richards, along with my office and Councilmember School and others, we leaned into it, right, as an opportunity to get the community to understand the vital work of Septa, the challenges that they had, and how Septa is such an important part of the city's recovery. And I think at the end of that process, right, not only did Septa respond in a responsible way, but I think the community felt empowered. And believe it or not, that chaos creates opportunities now as we talk about this work. And so, again, I appreciated SEPTA's leadership team for really helping Councilmember School and I lean into the issue with our community leadership. And I think, if you ask anybody in the community with all of the challenges that we have, they will always say, SEPTA listened to us, they respected us, they know that we're part of their customer base, right? And they created a process where we felt heard. And I think that's important. And I think, again, as we do other work, that is a great example of how we got to lean into these challenges.
Thank you. Jody, back to you on this. You can hear from Councilmember Sánchez a real enthusiasm, a passion for opportunity in all its forms. And I know SEPTA has some good stories to tell in terms of creating opportunities for people to be a part of doing this work. Is there anything you would want to highlight?
Right. Well, we've been working with our federal partners at FTA and FHWA on an initiative to unbundle some of our major procurements so that small businesses have more opportunities to respond to those bids and those procurements. So we're looking for ways that we can get even more small businesses, minority-owned businesses into our process. And things that we're allowed to do, there's, as you can imagine, there's a lot of regulations around how we procure materials and services and goods, and the support of the federal government in these opportunities is tremendous. So we're looking forward to being able to make more announcements about that as we go forward, and looking for those ways that we can invest in our local businesses. We already spend an amazing amount of funds. I've forgotten the percentage of funds within the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth, and it is tremendously powerful to our economy. I think that, the other thing that we have is 9,500 employees when we're fully staffed. And a lot of them are Philadelphia residents, and they're regional residents that we provide a ton of workforce training programs and opportunities. Our training department is amazing, and we have a ton of different skilled labor sectors in our daily operations here, from mechanics to maintenance and operators. You think of all the bus drivers and the rail operators. There is a lot going on behind the scenes at all of our districts and our shops throughout the city and the region. And so, to the extent that we can continue to partner, whether it's with the community college and other West Philadelphia Skills Initiative, a number of different organizations on workforce development have been so instrumental in making sure that our system keeps running and is truly a part of the community. It is essential for us.
Thank you. Sarah, when we talk about equity, we should also be thinking about all the different types of people who use our streets. So do you have any thoughts about what you would like to see and how you might measure success in terms of the implementation of the plan?
Well, I think that having the two networks, the transit system and the bicycle network and the sidewalk networks, just much more seamlessly connected. I think that the more we see both Septa incorporate bike lanes into the design of their bus stops or their trolley stops, and then on the other side, the more that the city incorporates the bus network into how it redesigns its streets with bike lanes and bus only lanes. All of that is to, I think, going to be indicative of increasing the enhancement of all these systems to attract more users. And I think that that's an important metric to be able to see who is using all these systems together. And a very basic metric for us is just the more people bicycling, and the more people that either bike or walk or take transit to work is, while not a perfect metric, is really indicative of a system that's helping encourage people to use those modes instead of driving. And right now, those modes have been fairly static for quite a long time. And we're not going to reach sustainability goals, climate goals, health goals, unless all those modes change. And so we're really looking for biking, walking, and transit to make up much more than just 50%, or at least 50%, or more than 50% of modes for commuting. And I think we're beginning to lay the groundwork for that with a more seamless and higher quality transit and bicycle network. But we need to see the results, and that means as people go back to work, that they're using transit and using bicycling and walking and not using their car.
That's great. And of course, as we're seeing $5 a gallon for gas, the more we can help people avoid the fuel pump, that certainly is going to promote equity in its own too. So thank you for that. I'll just open it up for all the panelists. If there's any final thoughts you'd like to share before we move into a broader question and answers.
I have two thoughts. One is that this needs to continue. We need this synergy between the city and Septa to last and to continue on into the next administration. Otherwise, it won't work. And so that's incredibly important. And the next thought is that the city itself needs to put in its own skin in the game and make investments. And that is we all recognize, very tough with huge competing needs. But it's so important for the city of Philadelphia to put some of its own resources on the table so that it can take advantage of federal and state dollars that are being made available. Without it, the money won't be there.
Okay, thank you.
I'd say that, while it is so important that we receive this federal funding that offers us about $95 million per year in additional funds, Philadelphia remains at a third or a quarter of the level of capital funding for other systems of our size. So even with this additional funding, there is still a need for funding if we want to achieve all the things in our vision for whether it's regional rail, if it's our metro system, our rail transit network on the Broad Street line and the Margaret Frankfurt line. If we want to achieve the new vehicles that we need, we need a combination of funding sources, and other regions do have additional local funding contributions to their capital budgets, more so than we do. So there's a need for continued partnership. We were glad that the state will be transitioning our funding from the turnpike tolling to our sales tax revenue for vehicle sales. which makes it possible for us to bond against our capital budget, which will allow us to make some of those bigger investments in a new trolley fleet and some of those other longer term investments that we need to make on our vehicle side. So I would just say that, you know, moving forward, it is exciting to have this alignment. It's exciting that we are all on the same page, and I hope it continues. But these are long-term investments, and we still need to be cognizant of the gaps in some of our funding.
That's great. Councilmember, I'll give you the last word.
I agree. I mean, I think the alignment is important. I think people want to see effectiveness. They want to see efficiency, the cost of doing business, as we've talked about. There's an inclusion side to this, and then there's a cost of doing business in the city of Philadelphia that's not aligned with other cities. I think folks from Septa and others will tell you what we pay to do certain things, whether it's curb cuts or others, in comparison to DC, New York, and others, is not aligned. And so we have to add some efficiency to that so that we can do more. As it relates to funding, you know, we have to get out of this mindset to plan for what we have, not what we need. And that's, you know, I'm encouraged by 2045 and saying, we're going to be aspirational. Again, I want to challenge us to be bolder. You know, mass transit or better transit along the boulevard should not be something that we shy away from talking about, right? As someone who represents, you know, hard to reach communities in the Northeast, you know, I remember the Broad Street spur when I grew up in Hunting Park, and, you know, this idea that we were going to have, you know, a metro system up the boulevard. We should be bold and talk about those things, because they won't happen if we just plan for what we have and not what we need as an infrastructure. So again, the plan starts putting us out there as it relates to these kinds of needs, and then connecting it to the region. You know, the city needs to do more, but, you know, there are going to be a lot of challenge grant opportunities at the federal and state level. And we're going to have to be much more proactive at pursuing those. And again, the bigger and the bolder the plan is, the more likely people are going to look at urban centers like Philadelphia and say, yeah, we want to do that there. We can do that there. You know, I know we've talked about regional lines to Reading and Lancaster. You know, we need to think through those things and what they will do to our economy. Even if the numbers sometimes are scary. I know it's billions of dollars, but it's how do you manage a regional center? And for Septa, they know this all too well with the suburban counties around us. We need to create more synergy in those. And I think more funding will come if those elected officials in other places see the connectivity opportunities in their own local economies. And so we miss out that conversation about how a better system in Philadelphia and the region helps everyone, so that the buy-in is there on the investments, both on the federal and state side.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Eileen, and I know I see a lot of questions coming up, so hopefully we can get through these questions in the time we have, and we're all ready to help respond.
Well, thank you, Mike, and everyone for the panel. I think actually a lot of the questions you all answered because it was going on during the conversation. But some of the questions I can rephrase a little bit. We were talking about even bringing back the buses and upgrading of our bus system. And we have a question about electric buses, and will that be in the funding? Will you be purchasing electric buses and power pads?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. We are, you know, we have we had a pilot for electric buses in our South Philadelphia district, and those buses provided us with a lot of good information about the range of battery electric buses and ones that you charge at a plug. We have done an analysis of our entire bus network as it is now, and how many of our routes would be able to use the current range of a battery electric bus. And there is a surprising amount. We have a lot of long routes and long runs, and current technology would require us to do some en route charging. Now, en route charging, people think of as like we're powering the bus while we're driving down the street. That's not exactly it. We're at the ends of lines, you know, where the buses lay over and recover after they've run a route and they've gotten to the end of it. So we've looked at places that we already own and have the ability to charge en route. It's going to take a significant investment in our infrastructure. So that charging infrastructure at those en route locations, the ends of lines, in addition to all of our bus facilities where our buses come home every night. And they need to have that overhead charging equipment installed. So we've gone through a very basic analysis of how much that would cost and what it would entail. And we've come to some limits of where there are places where it's just not gonna work. And that's primarily in some of our suburban locations where routes are long. So we're getting to a point where we feel like we have the first couple projects potentially for investing in a battery electric bus fleet, but we're also looking at ways that we can fill gaps or look at fuel cell technology that might be able to be competitive with that battery electric bus future. So looking at a couple zero emission bus fleet opportunities and trying to compare and weigh the costs and benefits of both of those options. So we're working on it. There are no big announcements yet, but we are working on the technical and logistics of getting all of that infrastructure in place and where to start.
Perfect. And with the funding coming into the city, we've talked some about planning, we talked about capital projects. What do you see with, is there maintenance dollars available for the buses, the subway, and even frankly, the maintenance buildings? We haven't talked about any of that.
Right. So we have a program for investing in our facilities. So our our depots and our shops. And, you know, right now we're thinking through as we, you know, look at a potential trolley fleet replacement. So having our trolleys a transition to more of a light rail vehicle, a slightly longer vehicle that allows for more capacity on it and level boarding or almost level boarding so that they're accessible to all abilities. That investment means that we need to have a new maintenance facilities for the trolley fleet. So we've been working very hard on finding where that maintenance facility should go, and then also investing in all of the infrastructure that supports the trolley fleets today. So in that regard, we definitely have some major investments ahead of us in our facilities to support that fleet. We're also looking at the Market Frankfurt line fleet and our regional rail cars. So 2/3 of our regional rail cars are from the 70s and they're beyond their useful life. The Silverliner 4s need to be replaced, and depending on the vehicle we choose to replace them, we have to think about the facilities and how we maintain those new vehicles. And the capacity of our existing shop. So that's how we've been thinking about our investments with those long-term vehicle procurements in mind.
I'd say of all the questions I see, this is my favorite one. If there were no financial issues, no political issues, what would be your project for this city? What's the dream project to make the whole city work all well together?
For me, obviously, I represent a lot of the boulevard. Really coming up with a plan that includes a better transit plan on the boulevard, it would be huge, right? It's something that will connect us to Ben Salem and other places in a way that we haven't talked enough about because we're scared of what the numbers would look like. But the boulevard would be the place.
I would just add to that making the boulevard safe, again, for its residents, its neighbors, is incredibly important, and a transit plan for the boulevard will help do that, but also a capital plan to fix a lot of the intersections that are really incredibly dangerous is critically important. Even though it's like less than 1% of the whole city's roadway, it's accountable for 15% of the city's traffic fatalities. So fixing the boulevard, and the city has laid the plan out with Routes for Change, but really implementing that plan is incredibly important. I'll jump in. I put it in the chat, but if money was no object, I would build out the region's trail network. So you had a true bicycle and walkable network throughout the whole 9 counties, and combine that with the city's 40-mile or even greater high quality bicycle network would be also one of my top priorities. The city also has a capital plan for Vision Zero that is not funded now, and that would be, another place to put resources.
Okay, Jody, you real quick, and then we have to wrap up.
I think I'll just let it lie at that. Route for Change, the boulevard, it needs investment. It's so important for safety and for our transit services across the Northeast. And then, and I love the idea of more investments in Vision Zero. Anything we can do to improve our safety numbers and enhance that pedestrian network is fabulous.
That's great. Well, I certainly want to thank everyone for joining today and for sticking around. I want to thank our very esteemed, tremendous panel here. We don't want to minimize the challenges involved in implementing this work, but I'm very excited to work with our panelists and everyone else to really get this done. So with that, I will say thank you and goodbye, and everyone have a great rest of your day.